Everyone in Arthur Bell's family believed the old radio beside his bed was proof his mind had begun to fail. At 82, Arthur still rose before dawn, wiped dust from the cracked dials, and listened through headphones older than his grandson, Caleb. His daughter called it a fixation. Caleb called it junk. But long before cell phones and emergency alerts, Arthur Bell had been the voice that kept Whitaker County alive when storms cut every road and every telephone line went dead. Then Caleb placed a stack of papers on Arthur's kitchen table and told him to sign away the abandoned radio station on Miller Hill. "It's rust and wires, Grandpa," he said. "Nobody listens anymore." Arthur looked at the papers, then at the boy he had once lifted onto his shoulders during 4th of July parades. He did not shout. He did not plead. He only asked if Caleb had ever wondered why Lena, Arthur's late wife, made him keep the final broadcast log. Caleb laughed. That laugh lasted until midnight. Because while the family slept, Arthur climbed Miller Hill with a brass key, a flashlight, and the one skill everyone believed time had buried. Inside the dust-covered control room, a red signal light blinked for the first time in 30 years. And through the static came a voice Arthur had not heard since the night his brother disappeared. And before we go any further, if stories like Arthur's remind you that age does not erase a person's worth, stay with this one. Because sometimes the people we stop listening to are the very ones holding the truth we need most. And Arthur Bell's truth was only beginning to speak. Arthur Bell had not always been the old man people spoke over. For 36 years, his name meant safety in Whitaker County. Not wealth, not power, not a title on a courthouse door safety. When storms rolled down from the northern ridge and knocked out the phone lines, when roads vanished beneath snow, when wildfires swallowed the lower woods, people waited for the signal from Miller Hill Station. Arthur was the man behind it. The station stood above town with its steel tower rising over the pines, its red light blinking like a small, stubborn heartbeat in the dark. Farmers checked that light before bad weather. Deputies relied on Arthur's broadcasts when their radios failed. Truck drivers listened for road warnings before crossing the pass. Mothers turned up kitchen radios during tornado watches, hoping to hear Arthur's calm voice telling them where the danger was moving and which roads were still open. He knew every wire in that building. He could repair a transmitter by lantern light, hear a loose ground and a faint hum, and restart the backup generator with frozen fingers. In his shirt pocket, he carried spare fuses, a pencil, and a little notebook filled with numbers only he seemed to understand. But Arthur never claimed he ran the station alone. Lena Bell, his wife, was the quiet half of every broadcast. She brought coffee during overnight storms, kept blankets in the storage closet for stranded linemen, and wrote names in the margins of the broadcast log when families called to say someone had made it home alive. She believed records mattered. "A voice disappears," she used to tell Arthur, "but a written line waits for the day somebody needs it." Arthur would smile whenever she said that, but he never ignored it. Their daughter Elaine grew up beneath the control desk, coloring on scrap paper while her father adjusted dials above her head. On slow evenings, Arthur let her speak into a dead microphone and pretend she was reporting from the clouds. Years later, when Elaine returned home after a hard divorce with a little boy named Caleb, Arthur did the same for his grandson. He taught Caleb how to coil wire, how to watch the sky, and how to never touch metal tools during a lightning storm. Back then, Caleb looked at Arthur as if his grandfather knew how the whole world worked. Then the world changed. The county replaced human voices with automated alerts. Budgets were cut. Miller Hill Station was closed, boarded, and left to rust. The tower light went dark. The sign at the gate sagged in the wind. People who once trusted the station began calling it an eyesore. Then Jacob disappeared. Jacob Bell was Arthur's younger brother, a restless man with quick hands, quick laughter, and a habit of finding trouble inside paperwork. He had helped at the station part-time, mostly with public notices and county records. One autumn night, Jacob told Arthur he had found something wrong in the land files around Miller Hill. He said names had been changed, signatures copied, dates shifted. By morning, Jacob was gone. No car, no body, no farewell note. The sheriff searched for weeks. The town whispered for months. But time did what time often does to inconvenient mysteries. It covered them with dust and expected the living to move on. Lena never did. Near the end of her life, when her body had grown weak but her mind remained painfully clear, she made Arthur promise 3 things. Keep the brass key to the station. Keep the final broadcast log. And if Miller Hill ever called him back, he had to go, no matter who laughed. Arthur promised. After Lena died, the house changed. Elaine began visiting with pillboxes, appointment reminders, and careful questions about whether he should still be alone. Caleb stopped asking about storms and started asking about property taxes. The radios in Arthur's spare room became clutter. The logbooks became fire hazards. The station became a liability. And Arthur became a problem to solve. No one said it cruelly at first. They used softer words: fragile, forgetful, isolated, unsafe. But Arthur understood the message beneath them. To his own family, the man who had once helped an entire county hear through disaster was now too old to be trusted with his own life. So every morning before sunrise, while the house sat quiet around him, Arthur turned the dial of his old radio and listened carefully beneath the hiss. Not because he was confused, because Lena had believed something was still waiting. And Arthur Bell had spent his whole life knowing the difference between noise and a signal. 2 days after Caleb laughed at the kitchen table, Elaine arrived with a folder, a casserole, and the careful smile she used when she had already made a decision but wanted Arthur to believe he still had a choice. She set the casserole on the counter first, as if warm food could soften the sound of paperwork. "Dad," she said, "we need to talk about what's practical." Arthur sat near the window with his coffee cooling beside him. He had not told her about Miller Hill. He had not told anyone that he had climbed the road after midnight, unlocked the old station, and heard Jacob's voice slip through the static. Some truths needed shelter before they could survive daylight. Caleb came in behind Elaine, wearing a navy jacket Arthur had never seen before, and carrying a leather portfolio too polished for a family visit. He kissed Elaine on the cheek, nodded at Arthur, then sat down without taking off his coat. That told Arthur more than the folder did. Elaine took the chair across from him. "Dad, Caleb and I have been worried." Arthur stirred his coffee once. "That so? You've been staying up all night with those radios," she said. "You forget appointments. You won't let anyone help with the house. And now Caleb says you're talking about Miller Hill again." Caleb opened the portfolio, not talking about it, obsessing over it. Arthur looked at his grandson's hands. The boy who once tangled copper wire around his own fingers now handled legal documents as if paper had always obeyed him. "I'm not obsessing," Arthur said. "I'm remembering." "That's exactly what worries us," Caleb replied. Caleb turned one page toward Arthur. On it was a photograph of Miller Hill Station, taken from the road below. Boards crossed 2 windows. The old sign leaned forward. The tower rose behind it, rusted and thin, like a bone the hill had refused to bury. "This is not a station anymore," Caleb said. "It's a hazard." Arthur did not touch the page. "It still has a foundation. It has unpaid maintenance, liability exposure, and no commercial function." Caleb tapped each phrase with his finger. "I had an assessment done." Arthur turned his eyes to his daughter. "An assessment?" Elaine folded her hands. "Just to understand the situation." Arthur almost smiled. The situation. People used that word when they wanted to remove the person from the center of his own life. Caleb slid another document forward. "The land is worth less than you think. The tower would cost more to demolish than the property can return. If somebody breaks in and gets hurt, you could be responsible." Elaine leaned closer. "Dad, this isn't about taking anything from you. It's about protecting you." There it was. The soft door through which control entered. Sometimes that sentence was love. Sometimes it meant, "We are tired of waiting for you to agree." Caleb removed a packet clipped with a blue tab. "There is a buyer interested in assuming the property as is. No repair costs, no cleanup burden, no future taxes. Clean transfer." "For us," Arthur repeated. Caleb's mouth tightened. "For the family, the deed has my name on it. For now." Elaine looked down. "Caleb." Arthur heard the next subject before Caleb said it. "We also need to discuss living arrangements," Caleb continued. "Mom and I toured Brookhaven Place last week. It's clean, good staff, medication management, social activities." Arthur kept one hand around the coffee mug. The ceramic was warm at the base and cold at the rim. "You toured a facility for me," he said, "without asking me." Elaine's eyes shone with worry. "We didn't want to upset you until we knew there were good options." "Options," Arthur said. Caleb pushed a brochure toward him. On the cover, an elderly couple smiled beneath a tree too green to be real. "You would still have independence," Caleb said. "Just safer independence." Arthur looked from the brochure to the sale packet, assisted living on one side, Miller Hill on the other. A soft bed in a place chosen by someone else, in exchange for surrendering the last place that still knew his hands. You put these together on purpose, he said. Caleb leaned back. They are connected. If we sell the station, we can fund better care. Elaine whispered. Dad, please don't make this sound cruel. Arthur turned to her, and what hurt him most was not that she was wrong. It was that part of her truly believed she was being kind. He remembered her at 6 years old under the control desk, asking if Thunder could hear the radio. Now she sat in his kitchen, frightened by his age, guided by her son, and unable to see that she was asking him to disappear politely. Who is the buyer? Arthur asked. Caleb answered too fast. A development group. What development group? It doesn't matter. The offer is fair for the condition. Arthur reached for the assessment, pulled it closer, and adjusted his glasses. Near the bottom of the second page, under Prepared For, he saw the name. Huxley Regional Development. Arthur did not move. Grant Huxley's father had been county commissioner the year Jacob vanished. Huxley was the name Lena had once refused to say at the dinner table because it made her hand tremble around her fork. Caleb mistook Arthur's stillness for confusion. It's normal to feel overwhelmed, he said. That's why I'm handling it. Arthur lifted his eyes. How long have you been talking to Huxley? Caleb's face changed by only a fraction, but Arthur had spent his life reading weak signals through interference. A few weeks, Caleb said. Maybe a month. Elaine stared at him. You said they contacted you after the assessment. They did, informally. Arthur turned the page again. The appraised value was not low. It was insultingly low. Less than a used pickup. Less than a year at Brookhaven Place. Less than the cost of the tower's original emergency generator, if it still sat where Arthur remembered it. They priced the station as scrap, Arthur said. That is what it is, Caleb replied. No, Arthur said quietly. That is what someone wants you to believe. Caleb gave a short laugh, but this time it sounded forced. Grandpa, this is exactly why we're concerned. You think every old document is a conspiracy. Arthur rose slowly. His knees ached, his back pulled tight. He hated that both of them noticed. But he stood anyway. I won't sign today. Elaine reached for his sleeve. Dad? I won't sign today, he repeated. Caleb gathered the papers with controlled impatience. Then we'll revisit this when you've had time to think clearly. Arthur looked at him, and for the first time Caleb seemed almost young again, young enough to believe age was the same as defeat. Thinking clearly is what I'm doing, Arthur said. After they left, the kitchen felt staged and empty. The casserole sat untouched. The brochure remained on the table, its smiling strangers promising comfort without freedom. Arthur waited until the sound of Caleb's car faded down the road. Then he opened the drawer beneath the old telephone and took out Lena's brass key. Beside it lay the final broadcast log, wrapped in brown cloth, exactly where Lena had told him to keep it. Arthur placed his palm over the cloth and listened to the house settle around him. For the first time since his wife's funeral, the silence did not feel like an ending. It felt like a warning. Arthur did not sleep much that night. He sat at the kitchen table long after Elaine and Caleb were gone, the brass key resting beside the wrapped broadcast log like two small things that had outlived everyone's excuses. Outside, the street lamps glowed over quiet lawns and trimmed hedges. Every house on Arthur's block looked peaceful from the road, the way families like to appear when no one could hear what had been said behind the curtains. At 3:47 in the morning, he stood. He moved slowly, but not uncertainly. There was a difference, though few people his age were allowed to claim it. He packed the logbook in an old canvas field bag, added a flashlight, 2 sandwiches, a thermos of coffee, a folding knife, and the small roll of electrical tape he still kept in the junk drawer. From a cedar box in the bedroom, he took Lena's wool scarf and wrapped it once around his neck. Then he wrote a note for Elaine. I am safe. I am going where I should have gone years ago. Do not send Caleb after me. He left it under the sugar bowl because Elaine always looked there when she made coffee. By dawn, Arthur was standing at the end of his driveway, one hand on his cane, the field bag hanging from his shoulder. He had called Marvin Pike, the only taxi driver in town who still answered his phone before sunrise and still remembered when Arthur's voice had come through every kitchen radio in Whitaker County. Marvin's yellow cab rolled up with a cough from the engine. Miller Hill? Marvin asked through the open window, as if Arthur might have changed his mind. Miller Hill, Arthur said. Marvin looked at the bag, the cane, the scarf, and the pale line of morning just beginning behind the rooftops. He did not laugh. That alone made Arthur grateful. The road out of town climbed slowly past closed gas stations, mailboxes silvered with frost, and fields that had not yet caught the sun. Miller Hill rose beyond them, dark against the morning sky. For years, Arthur had avoided looking directly at the tower. It was easier to let it stay in the corner of his vision, a shape from another life, than to face what had gone silent there. But as the cab turned onto the old access road, Arthur leaned forward. The gate was chained, but not well. Someone had cut the original lock years ago and replaced it with a cheap one already orange with rust. The station sign hung crooked from one bolt. Miller Hill, Emergency Broadcast Station. Half the letters were missing. The word emergency had faded almost white. Marvin parked beside the gate. "You want me to wait?" Arthur looked up the hill. Pine needles covered the road. Grass had grown through the cracks. At the top, the station sat with its boarded windows and sagging roof, the tower rising behind it, like a warning nobody had taken seriously. "No," Arthur said. "But thank you." Marvin hesitated. "Folks say the building's not safe. Folks say many things after they stop knowing a place." That answer seemed to satisfy him, or maybe it only told him that arguing would waste the daylight. Marvin helped Arthur carry the field bag past the gate, then drove away slowly, watching in the rear-view mirror until the trees swallowed the old man from sight. The climb took Arthur longer than he expected. His breath shortened halfway up. His right knee burned. Twice, he stopped and rested one hand against a pine trunk, slick with cold sap. He hated the weakness, not because it hurt, but because he could hear Caleb's voice using it as evidence. Still, he climbed. At the top, Miller Hill Station waited. The building was smaller than memory and sadder than photographs. One corner of the roof had buckled. The front steps had split down the middle. A swallow's nest clung under the eaves. The tower's lower beams were stained with rust, and vines twisted through the fence around its base. Arthur stood before the door, unable to move for a moment. He remembered arriving here in summer heat with a toolbox in one hand and Elaine asleep against Lena's shoulder in the truck. He remembered Jacob sitting on the steps, eating an apple, and pretending to read county notices. He remembered Lena in the doorway during a snowstorm, her cheeks red from the cold, holding up a thermos like a lantern. The present returned with the smell of wet wood and old metal. Arthur slid Lena's brass key into the lock. For one terrible second, it would not turn. Then something inside gave way with a dry click. The door opened inward, dragging dust across the floor. Arthur stepped inside and lifted his flashlight. The front room was wrecked by weather and neglect. Ceiling tiles hung down in soft brown curls. A raccoon had scattered insulation near the supply closet. The old reception desk lay on its side, drawers missing, as if someone had searched it in anger long ago. But the bones of the place were still there. The hallway, the breaker cabinet, the framed county map, water-stained but readable. The narrow window through which Lena used to pass coffee into the control room when the phones rang too hard and too often. Arthur touched the wall as he walked. "Still here," he whispered. His voice sounded strange in the building, too small for all the years it had been carrying. The main control room had suffered less than the entrance. Dust covered the console, but the panels were intact. The microphone still rested in its cradle. 3 knobs were missing. 2 gauges were cracked. Someone had pried open a cabinet beneath the patch bay, but the emergency switchboard remained bolted to the wall. Arthur's fingers moved toward it before he could stop them. They knew where to go. Line check, ground check, battery bank, auxiliary feed. Nothing powered. Nothing alive. Not yet. Then he turned toward the back hallway. Studio B stood at the end, behind a narrow gray door. Arthur's breath caught. Every other door in the station had been forced, warped, or left open. Studio B alone remained shut. Its lock plate was scratched but unbroken. The small square of glass in the upper half had been painted black from the inside. Arthur raised the flashlight. Near the lower hinge, cut into the wooden frame with the tip of a knife, was a mark he had not seen in 30 years. 3 short lines. 1 circle. The crooked little symbol Jacob used to carve onto tool handles so nobody would mistake them for Arthur's. Arthur lowered himself carefully onto one knee, ignoring the pain that flashed up his leg, and brushed dust from the carving with his thumb. Jacob had been here. Not in rumor. Not in memory. Here. After the night he supposedly vanished. Arthur sat back on his heel, the brass key cold in his palm, while the silent station seemed to lean closer around him. For the first time, Miller Hill did not feel abandoned. It felt guarded. Arthur did not try to open Studio B right away. That was the first rule he had learned in all his years working with damaged systems. Never force the part that might be holding the answer. A broken lock could be replaced. A disturbed clue could not, so he stood, brushed dust from his trousers, and stepped back from the gray door with Jacob's mark carved near the hinge. His hand wanted the key. His heart wanted the room, but the station needed daylight, order, and power before it gave up anything safely. Arthur set his field bag on the main control desk and began where he had begun 1,000 times before. He checked the building, not as a dreamer, not as a grieving brother, as an engineer. The front entrance had water damage. The west wall had swollen near the baseboard. The roof leaked over the old reception area, but not above the control room. That mattered. The main console had gathered dust thick enough to write in, yet the metal beneath had not corroded through. 2 windows were broken. One had been patched with plywood. Mice had found the supply closet. Raccoons had torn insulation from the ceiling above the hall. But the station was not dead. Arthur could feel that before he proved it. He found the breaker cabinet behind a warped wooden panel. Most of the switches had been flipped off years ago. One was missing its label. Another had been taped down with black electrical tape that had hardened and curled at the edges. He did not trust any of them yet. In the generator room, the air smelled of oil, rust, and mouse nests. The old backup generator sat under a canvas cover, heavier than memory, its green paint scarred but its housing intact. Arthur ran his fingers along the fuel line, checked the belts, tested the manual lever, and found one cracked hose that would never survive pressure. Of course, he muttered. He almost smiled. Machines, unlike people, usually told the truth when something was wrong. By noon, his knees were aching badly enough that he sat on an overturned crate and ate one of the sandwiches he had packed. The bread had flattened inside the bag. The coffee in his thermos had gone lukewarm. Through the cracked doorway, he could see the tower outside, its rusted beams cutting the sky into narrow pieces. His phone buzzed in his coat pocket. Elaine. Arthur let it ring. A minute later, it buzzed again. Galib. He let that one ring too. The third call came from Elaine, and this time Arthur listened to the voicemail without putting the phone to his ear. Her voice filled the empty control room, thin and frightened. Dad, I saw your note. Please call me. Caleb is furious, but I told him not to drive up there yet. I don't know what you think you're proving, but that building isn't safe. Please, just tell me you're all right. Arthur looked at the cracked microphone in its cradle. I'm all right, he said, though he did not press call. He could hear Caleb's message without playing it. Demands had a shape even before they had sound. By afternoon, Arthur had cleared enough debris to reach the battery bank below the auxiliary shelf. 3 batteries were useless, their sides swollen. One, miraculously, still held a weak charge, not enough to power the transmitter. Enough, perhaps, to test a line. He cleaned the terminals with a folded strip of sandpaper from his bag. The work took longer than it should have. His fingers stiffened in the cold. Once, a small screw slipped from his grip and rolled beneath the console. Arthur lowered himself to retrieve it and felt a sharp pull in his back that made his vision flash white. He stayed on one knee, breathing through his teeth. No one saw him there. No one rushed to help. No one said, "See? This is why you cannot be alone." That was both frightening and freeing. After a while, Arthur reached under the console, found the screw by touch, and laughed once under his breath. Still here, he told his hands. Near sunset, he managed to bring one work lamp alive. It flickered, coughed, dimmed, then steadied into a weak yellow glow that spread across the control room like a cautious guest. Dust shone in the air. The old panels emerged from shadow. Labels Arthur had written decades earlier appeared beneath grime. Weather relay, county band, auxiliary input, Studio A, Studio B. His eyes stopped there. Estudio B. The label plate was cleaner than the others, as if someone had wiped it more recently. Arthur leaned closer. A thin black wire ran from beneath the Studio B channel strip, disappeared behind the console, and entered a hole drilled low in the wall. Arthur frowned. That wire did not belong. He knew every official line in the station. Studio B had once been used for recorded announcements, school programs, and county interviews. Its wiring should have run up through the ceiling conduit, not down through the rear wall. Arthur took his flashlight and followed the wire along the baseboard. It had been painted over. Twice. Whoever installed it had wanted it hidden, not temporary. It slipped behind a filing cabinet too heavy for Arthur to move without leverage. He searched the supply closet and found an old crowbar with a cracked handle. Inch by inch, he pried the cabinet away from the wall, stopping whenever his breathing grew rough. Behind it, the wire vanished through a metal plate screwed into the floor. Arthur wiped dust from the plate. There were initials scratched into one corner. J. B. Jacob Bell. Arthur sat back on the floor. The building settled around him with small wooden sounds. Wind pressed against the boarded window. Somewhere above, a loose strip of metal tapped the roof in an uneven rhythm. Jacob had not merely left a mark on the door. He had altered the station. Arthur looked toward the hallway, toward Studio B, and then down at the floor plate. A memory rose before he could stop it. Jacob, at 24, lying on his back beneath the console, grinning up through a web of wires. If anybody asks, I'm improving county efficiency. Arthur had told him he was going to electrocute himself. Jacob had replied, only if the county pays extra. The memory should have hurt. Instead, it sharpened Arthur's focus. By the time darkness covered the hill, the temperature inside the station had dropped hard. Arthur found 2 wool blankets in the storage closet, both smelling of dust and cedar. He dragged an old office chair into the control room, set the work lamp on the desk, and blocked the broken window with a loose panel he found in the hallway. His phone buzzed again and again until he turned it off. The world below the hill wanted him back in the role it understood. Old man. Problem. Patient. Signature. Miller Hill asked something different. It asked him to remember how systems spoke. Arthur wrapped Lena's scarf tighter around his neck and opened the final broadcast log. The pages smelled faintly of paper, cloth, and the drawer where Lena had guarded them. He turned carefully through storm reports, road closures, public notices, school cancellations, names of missing dogs, names of rescued men, names of babies born when roads were frozen shut. Then he reached the final page. The last official entry was dated October 17, 30 years earlier. Jacob's handwriting appeared beneath Arthur's own. Studio B reroute complete. Backup path confirmed. If primary record disappears, follow the quiet line. Arthur read it 3 times. Follow the quiet line, the hidden wire. Below the words, in smaller letters, Jacob had written a frequency. Arthur knew it instantly, not because it was common, because it was not supposed to exist on any county chart. A private test band. One Arthur and Jacob had used only twice, decades ago, when they were young enough to think secrets were harmless. Outside, the wind moved through the tower, and for a moment the old metal seemed to hum. Arthur closed the logbook and looked at the dark hallway leading to Studio B. He would not open the room tonight. Not tired. Not cold. Not with his hands shaking from the day's work. But he had found the path. And somewhere beneath the floor, behind the walls, or under the locked room Jacob had guarded with a knife mark and a hidden wire, Miller Hill Station was waiting to speak. Arthur waited until morning before he followed the quiet line. Not because fear had stopped him, though fear was there. It sat in his chest all night while the old station creaked around him and the wind scraped pine branches along the outside wall. But Arthur had spent too many years around emergency systems to mistake urgency for wisdom. When a line was hidden for 30 years, you did not chase it in darkness with tired hands. At sunrise, Arthur's back ached from sleeping in the office chair, but the work lamp still glowed beside the console. That small circle of light felt like permission. He heated coffee over a camping burner, ate the second sandwich slowly, and opened the final broadcast log to Jacob's note. Studio B reroute complete. Backup path confirmed. If primary record disappears, follow the quiet line. Below it sat the frequency Arthur had not seen written anywhere in decades. He copied the number onto a scrap envelope, then began tracing the hidden wire. The metal floor plate behind the filing cabinet was secured with 4 screws. 3 came loose after a fight. The 4th was rusted tight. Arthur sprayed it with lubricant and waited, flexing his fingers to keep them from stiffening. While he waited, he studied the console. Studio B's channel strip had been modified. Not clumsily, not by vandals. Someone had opened the panel, bypassed the standard recording route, and built a secondary path beneath the board. Jacob's work had always looked messy from the outside and brilliant underneath. Arthur could almost hear his brother saying, "Anybody can hide a thing by locking it up. The trick is hiding it where only the right person knows to look." Arthur removed the panel. Inside, dust lay over colored wires, resistors, and two small relays Arthur did not remember installing. One relay was marked with a red dot. The other had a strip of masking tape wrapped around it. The writing on the tape was faded, but when Arthur lifted the lamp closer, he saw two words: "For Art." His throat tightened. No one had called him Art since Jacob vanished. Lena had sometimes tried, in her gentlest moments, but even she had stopped when she saw what it did to him. Arthur placed one hand on the console until the room steadied. Then he worked. He replaced two cracked wires with pieces from an unused telephone junction. He cleaned corrosion from the relay contact. He bridged the weak battery through the auxiliary feed, not enough to run the transmitter, but enough to test the hidden route. Once, the lamp flickered and nearly died. When it steadied again, Arthur continued. By late morning, he had the modified strip connected to a portable monitor speaker he found in the storage cabinet. It was dented, but the cone was not torn. He attached clips, checked the ground twice, and turned the gain down before bringing any current through the line. Then he tuned to Jacob's frequency. At first, there was only a low hiss. Arthur closed his eyes. Most people heard static and thought it meant nothing. Arthur heard texture: wet static, dry static, distance, interference. A dead band had a flatness to it. A living signal, however weak, had movement. This one moved. He adjusted the dial by the smallest touch his fingers could manage. The hiss deepened. A click passed through the speaker. Arthur did not breathe. Another click came, followed by a faint mechanical flutter, the sound of a tape mechanism trying to wake after decades of sleep. Then a voice broke through. "Art." Arthur gripped the edge of the console. The recording warped, stretched, and almost vanished beneath the noise. He reached for the tuning knob and steadied it. "Art, if you're hearing this, then either I was wrong about everything, or I was right enough to be scared." Jacob, older than Arthur remembered from his laughter, younger than the ghost Arthur had carried for 30 years. The voice came thin, damaged, but unmistakable. Arthur lowered himself into the chair before his knees gave way. The tape continued. "I found the Miller Hill transfer papers in the county archive. They were never supposed to be filed as private land. The original deed put the hill and station under a public emergency trust. Bell family custodianship, not ownership, custodianship." Arthur stared at the broadcast log. Custodianship. The word opened a door in his mind. His father had used it once when Arthur was young. "Not ours to sell," he had said while repairing the old tower fence. "Ours to keep ready." Arthur had thought it was just one of his father's sayings. Jacob's voice crackled again. "Huxley knows. Commissioner Huxley knows. He had copies made. He changed names on the index sheet and buried the trust reference under an old storm damage file. If the station shuts down, if the land looks abandoned long enough, he can claim its surplus and push it private." The speaker popped. Arthur's hand moved automatically, adjusting gain, cleaning the sound as best he could. "I made duplicates," Jacob said. "One in the log path, one behind the board. The original is still here, but I can't leave it where they'll search first. If anything happens to me, don't trust the appraisal, don't trust a Huxley offer, and don't let them make you think the hill is worthless." The tape dragged. For several seconds, only static filled the room. Arthur leaned closer. "Come on, Jake." The speaker clicked again. "The trust requires the station to serve the county during emergency failure. As long as the system can be restored, no private developer can take it. But you'll need proof that the equipment still has function. You'll need the log, the hidden reroute, and the deed packet." A sound came through behind Jacob's voice. A door. Footsteps. Jacob whispered then, fast and close to the microphone. "Studio B wall. South panel. Behind the acoustic board. Art, listen to me. If they come asking for signatures, it means they found the gap. Don't sign. Lena will know what to keep." The recording ended with a hard snap. The speaker fell silent. Arthur sat in the control room without moving. The work lamp hummed beside him. The tower creaked outside. Dust drifted in the beam of morning light, as if nothing important had happened at all. But everything had changed. Jacob had not abandoned the family. He had stayed long enough to hide the truth, and something had happened before he could bring it home. Arthur turned towards Studio B. The gray door waited at the end of the hall. His grief rose, but this time it did not fold him inward. It moved through him like current finding a circuit. He stood. The lock on Studio B was old, but not the same as the front door. Arthur tried Lena's brass key. It did not fit. He checked the frame, the hinges, the glass painted black from inside. Then he saw a small metal plate beneath the knob, flush with the wood, almost invisible under grime. Not a lock plate, a contact point. Jacob had not built a room to be opened with a key. He had built one to be opened by a signal. Arthur went back to the console, looked at the two relays, and understood. The hidden wire did not merely send sound out of Studio B. It sent a pulse back. His hands moved faster now, not young, but certain. He reset the relay marked with the red dot, tuned again to the private frequency, and pressed the old talkback switch. For a second, nothing happened. Then, from the hallway, came a soft metallic release. Arthur walked toward Studio B with the flashlight in one hand and the logbook in the other. The door had opened half an inch. From inside came the smell of dust, paper, and sealed air. Arthur pushed gently. The room revealed itself in the narrow beam of light. One chair, one covered recorder, a wall of stained acoustic panels, and on the south side, a square panel slightly newer than the rest. Arthur stepped inside. On the chair sat an envelope yellowed with age. Across the front, in Jacob's handwriting, were 3 words. Arthur, forgive me. Arthur did not open Jacob's envelope in Studio B with shaking hands. He wanted to. For 30 years, he had lived beside the empty place his brother left behind, and now 3 words waited on yellowed paper as if they could explain a lifetime. Arthur, forgive me. But the room was too cold, his pulse too unsteady, and the station still too fragile. So Arthur placed the envelope inside the final broadcast log, wrapped both in Lena's brown cloth, and carried them back to the control room. He had learned long ago that important things deserved more than desperation. They deserved a clear head, a locked door, and witnesses when the time came. By late morning, his body was protesting every choice he had made. His back throbbed. His fingers were stiff from wire work. The weak lamp buzzed above the console, and the station smelled of dust, old oil, and the faint dampness of a building trying not to collapse. He was tightening the temporary patch over the broken window when he heard tires outside. Arthur froze. For a moment, he imagined Caleb marching up the steps with Elaine behind him, both of them ready to drag him home in the name of love. He reached for his cane, then for the logbook. But the knock that came at the door was not Caleb's impatient fist. It was firm, practical, and followed by a woman's voice. Arthur Bell, if you're dead in there, I'm going to be very annoyed I carried this toolbox up the hill for nothing. Arthur opened the door. Rosa Whittaker stood on the cracked steps in a canvas coat, gray hair tucked under a wool cap, a red toolbox in one hand, and a paper grocery sack in the other. Rosa owned Whittaker Hardware, the last store in town where a person could still buy a single screw without being asked to download an app. How did you know I was here? Arthur asked. Marvin Pike drinks coffee at my counter every morning, Rosa said. And your daughter came in looking like she'd swallowed a thunderstorm. Arthur stepped aside. Rosa entered without waiting for permission, but not rudely. She looked around the station the way a nurse looked at a patient, noticing damage without declaring death. Roof's bad over reception, she said. West sill is rotten. You need a proper heater before nightfall, and if that's the original generator out back, you need hose, clamps, and fuel line before you even think of waking it up. Arthur blinked at her. Rosa set the toolbox on the floor. My father serviced farm radios before cable came through. I know enough to be dangerous. For the first time since he had left home, Arthur felt the edge of a smile come to his face. Most people asked why he was here. Rosa asked what the building needed. She had brought soup in a jar, 2 rolls, work gloves, a bundle of rags, 3 batteries, a coil of wire, weather stripping, and a small propane heater with a warning label she had clearly ignored before and survived. Arthur tried to tell her he could pay later. Rosa waved him off. You paid this county plenty when you kept my brother from freezing in that blizzard. I remember my mother sitting beside the radio until your voice said the rescue crew found him. Some debts don't come with invoices. The words struck Arthur harder than he expected. In his own house, his past had become evidence of decline. In Rosa's mouth, it still had weight. They worked through the afternoon. Rosa patched the worst window gap while Arthur tested the batteries. She made him sit when his face went pale, and unlike Elaine, she did not make sitting feel like surrender. She simply handed him a jar of soup and said, "Engineers are no good to anyone face down on the floor." Arthur told her part of the truth. Not all. Enough. He mentioned Jacob's mark, the hidden wire, the strange recording, and Huxley's name. Rosa did not laugh. At Huxley, her expression hardened. That family has been trying to own every hill they can see since before I was born. You know Grant? I know men like Grant. They call greed development and expect everybody to clap. Before sunset, Rosa helped Arthur rig the propane heater safely near the control room door. Warmth moved slowly into the space, thin at first, then real enough to loosen his hands. That was when they heard the sound below the hill. Not a car engine exactly. More like one trying and failing. Rosa went to the front window. Someone's down by the access road. Arthur took his flashlight. They found the vehicle near the lower bend, half hidden behind sumac and winter weeds. It was an old blue sedan with a cracked windshield and one flat tire. A young man sat inside beneath a blanket, his chin tucked to his chest. When Arthur tapped the glass, the boy jerked awake and reached for something in the passenger seat. "Easy," Arthur said. "We're not here to hurt you." The young man lowered his hand. He could not have been more than 19. His hair was dark and unevenly cut, his jacket too thin for the weather, his face marked by the exhausted suspicion of someone who had learned that help usually came with conditions. "I'm leaving," he said through the glass. "You won't get far on that tire," Rosa replied. His eyes shifted to her, then back to Arthur. "I didn't break into anything. I didn't say you did," Arthur said. The boy hesitated, then opened the door. "Name's Noah." Arthur saw a duffel bag in the back seat, a blanket, a gas station receipt, and a school notebook curled from damp. He also saw pride fighting hunger. "You been sleeping here?" Rosa asked. Noah looked away. "Just last night, Arthur had raised a daughter. He had helped find lost hunters, stranded drivers, frightened children calling through storm lines. He knew when a person was telling the smallest version of a larger truth. "There's soup at the station," Arthur said. Noah shook his head. "I don't need charity." "Good," Arthur said, "because I need help carrying a battery." That changed the boy's face. "Not much. Enough." Noah carried the battery up the hill, as if it weighed nothing. Inside the station, he stood near the doorway, ready to leave if anyone moved too quickly. Rosa poured soup into a tin cup and placed it on the desk without comment. Noah ate, after pretending he would not. By the time night settled, Arthur knew only pieces. Noah had been living with an uncle outside town. There had been a fight, a missing paycheck, accusations, a door locked from the inside. Noah said it like weather, but Arthur heard the bruise beneath it. "You can sleep here tonight," Arthur said. Noah looked toward the hallway. "In this place? It has a roof over most of it." Rosa snorted. "That's almost optimism." Noah glanced at the old microphone, the patched wires, the lamp, the heater. "What is this place?" Arthur answered carefully. "A station that people forgot before it was finished speaking." The boy looked at him then, really looked, as if he understood more than Arthur had meant to say. Later, while Rosa packed her tools, Noah stood near the broken window and pointed toward the trees beyond the tower fence. "You know men were up here 2 nights ago?" he asked. Arthur turned. "What men?" "Survey crew, maybe. White truck, no markings. They had lights out by the tower base, and one guy kept saying Huxley wanted the lower road cleared before the papers were done." Rosa went still. Arthur felt the warmth of the heater, the weight of the logbook beneath his hand, and the hidden envelope inside it. Caleb had not even gotten a signature, but Huxley was already measuring the hill. For the first time, in 30 years, Miller Hill Station held more than one breathing person after dark. Rosa at the door. Noah by the window. Arthur at the console, listening to the old building settle around them. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt like people gathering before a broadcast. By morning, Miller Hill Station no longer felt completely abandoned. It was still broken. The roof sagged over the reception room. The hallway smelled of damp wood. The tower outside was still dark and rusted against the pale sky. But now there was coffee on the control desk, a blanket over the second chair, tools lined up beside the console, and a small heater breathing warmth into the room. Noah had swept a path through the dust from the front door to the control room. Rosa had patched the worst window crack with cardboard and tape before leaving a note on the desk, getting Miriam. "Do not climb anything. That means you, Arthur." Arthur read it twice and nearly smiled. He remembered Miriam Cole. She had been a town attorney for decades, plain-spoken, sharp-eyed, and impossible to intimidate. Lena once said Miriam could find a missing comma in a hurricane. If anyone could tell whether Jacob's recording meant something beyond grief and suspicion, it was Miriam. While they waited, Arthur opened Jacob's envelope. He did it slowly, at the control desk, with the final broadcast log beside him. Inside were 3 folded pages and a small strip of microfilm sealed in brittle plastic. The letter began without comfort. "Art, I did not run because I was tired of the family. I ran because I was followed, and I stayed away because I thought distance would keep them from you." Arthur stopped reading. For 30 years, the town had made Jacob smaller, with every explanation. Restless, irresponsible, ashamed, gone by choice. But his brother's own hand told another story. Arthur kept reading. "Huxley found the gap in the Miller Hill papers before I did. His office changed the index, not the original. The original deed names the hill as emergency use land held in trust, with a bell custodian only as long as the station can be restored for public communication. If they prove abandonment, they can petition to dissolve it. If you prove function, they cannot take it private." Below that, Jacob had written a file number, 72E, County Emergency Land Trust, Miller Hill. Arthur copied it into the margin of the broadcast log, his hand steadier than his chest felt. Noah came in carrying an armful of dead branches from near the generator shed. "You okay?" Arthur folded the letter. "I am less alone than I was yesterday." Noah did not seem to know what to do with that, so he nodded and set the branches near the door. Rosa returned before noon with Miriam Cole in the passenger seat of her pickup. Miriam was smaller than Arthur remembered, but only the way a pocket knife was smaller than a shovel. She stepped out in a charcoal coat, silver hair pinned flat, and looked at the station without flinching. "Rosa says you have a dead brother speaking through old equipment and a buried land trust," she said. Arthur glanced at Rosa. Rosa shrugged. I summarized. Miriam entered, refused coffee, accepted the best chair, and held out her hand for the logbook. Arthur gave it to her. She read without drama. She checked the dates. She studied Jacob's letter, the file number, and the sealed microfilm. Then she tapped one finger on the page. "This file series is real," she said. Rosa leaned forward. "You remember it?" "I remember the category. 70s emergency land designations, radio points, generator sites, flood shelters, volunteer fire reserves. If Miller Hill was placed in trust, then it was not ordinary private property." Arthur felt his breath slow. "Caleb has an assessment from Huxley Regional Development." Miriam's mouth tightened. "Of course he does." Arthur played Jacob's recording for her next. With Rosa's batteries and a cleaner connection, the voice came through better than before. "Huxley knows. Commissioner Huxley knows." Miriam raised a hand. Again, Arthur replayed it. "Huxley knows. Commissioner Huxley knows." She removed her glasses. Grant Huxley Sr. was commissioner when Jacob disappeared. Arthur nodded. "He also chaired the County Surplus Land Committee," Miriam said. Rosa swore softly. Noah looked between them. "What does that mean?" "It means," Miriam said, "a man in the right office could make public land appear unwanted, unmaintained, and available, if nobody was watching closely." Arthur looked towards Studio B. Jacob was watching, and that may be why Jacob became inconvenient. No one answered that. Outside, a truck slowed near the access road, then rolled on. A second car did the same 10 minutes later. Noah saw it first. "People are watching," he said. Rosa went to the window. "People always watch once they smell trouble." Miriam closed the logbook. "Then we should be careful what they see." But Arthur was thinking about one sentence in Jacob's letter. "If you prove function, they cannot take it private." The station did not need to be beautiful. It did not need to be modern. It needed to show that it could still serve the county in an emergency. Arthur stood and went to the console. Miriam looked up. "Arthur, if the trust depends on the station being restorable," he said, "then we begin restoring it." Rosa nodded once. "Now you're talking." That afternoon, Miller Hill became work instead of memory. Noah cleared leaves from the generator vent and found the old fuel intake half buried under dirt. Rosa replaced the cracked hose Arthur had identified the day before. Miriam sat at the reception desk with a yellow legal pad, calling the county archive whenever her phone found enough signal near the window. Arthur moved between the console and generator room. He was slow, and everyone saw it, but nobody used it against him. When his hands shook, Noah held the flashlight. When Rosa needed a smaller clamp, she asked Arthur where the old supply bins had been. He remembered. Every useful memory became evidence that Caleb was wrong. Near dusk, they tested the generator. It coughed once. Noah jumped back. Rosa grinned. Better than silence. Arthur adjusted the choke and checked the temporary fuel line. Again. The second pull produced a rough sputter that shook dust from the wall. The generator caught for 4 full seconds, then died. 4 seconds, not enough to power the station. Enough to prove it was not dead. From the road below, someone lifted a phone and began filming. Miriam saw it. By morning, half the town will know Miller Hill made noise again. Arthur looked at the tower, still dark above them. For years, people had called the station useless because it was quiet. Now even 4 seconds of sound could become a threat. Noah wiped grease on his sleeve. "Can we make it run longer?" Arthur looked at him, then at the logbook under Miriam's hand. "Yes," he said. "But first, we make sure the right people hear the right truth." The tower light did not blink yet, but Miller Hill had made a sound, and Arthur understood that a signal did not have to be loud to begin changing everything. By the next afternoon, half of Whitaker County had heard that Miller Hill Station made noise again. Not music, not a broadcast, not even a full minute of power. Just 4 seconds of an old generator coughing back to life. But in a town that had spent 30 years calling the station dead, 4 seconds was enough to make people talk. By noon, 2 cars had slowed near the gate. By 1, someone had posted a shaky video online. By 2, Elaine's car came up the access road too fast, Caleb's black SUV close behind it. A third vehicle followed. Arthur saw it from the control room window. The silver truck was clean, expensive, and too new for the cracked road. A dark green logo marked the door. Huxley Regional Development. Rosa, standing beside the console with a coil of wire in her hands, saw it too. "Well," she said, "greed found the hill in daylight." Noah moved toward the hallway. Arthur lifted one hand. "Stay where people can see you," Arthur said quietly. "Men like Grant Huxley prefer shadows. Don't give him one." Elaine reached the steps first. Her face was pale with worry, anger, and embarrassment all tangled together. "Dad," she called, "you need to come out." Arthur opened the front door but did not step aside. "I'm already out," he said. "That seems to be the problem." Caleb came up behind her, jaw tight, eyes moving past Arthur into the building. "This has gone far enough." Grant Huxley climbed the steps last. He was in his late 50s, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, with the polished calm of a man who had learned to sound reasonable while taking things. He smiled at Arthur as if they were meeting at a charity lunch. "Mr. Bell," he said, "Grant Huxley, I wish we were meeting under less concerning circumstances." Arthur did not take his offered hand. Grant lowered it smoothly. "Fair enough." Elaine looked past Arthur and saw Rosa. Then Noah. Then the tools, wires, heater, and papers on the desk. "Who are these people?" she asked. "People helping me," Arthur said. Caleb laughed under his breath. "A hardware store owner and some kid sleeping in his car?" Noah's face hardened. Arthur's voice sharpened before Noah could answer. "Careful, Caleb. You're standing in a building saved more than once by people your kind would call unimportant." Elaine flinched. "Dad, please." "Nobody is attacking anyone." Grant stepped in with a gentle tone. "Mrs. Bell, your father is clearly under stress. This structure is unsafe. I advised Caleb that continued occupancy here creates serious liability." Miriam Cole appeared behind Arthur, holding her yellow legal pad. "Interesting," she said. "Since Mr. Bell has not transferred occupancy or ownership to anyone connected with your company." Grant's eyes moved to her. For the first time, his smile paused. "Miriam Cole," he said, "I heard you retired." "I did. From billing hours, not from reading. Caleb pointed at the hallway. Grandpa, pack whatever you brought. We're leaving before somebody gets hurt. Arthur looked at his grandson. You came to take me home or take the logbook? Caleb's eyes flickered toward the control desk. Elaine noticed. So did Miriam. Grant folded his hands in front of him. No one is here to take anything. But certain documents may be relevant to determining whether Mr. Bell is making safe decisions. Rosa snorted. That was almost a sentence. Elaine stepped closer. Dad, I am scared. You left without telling me. You turned off your phone. You're sleeping in a condemned building with strangers. It isn't condemned, Miriam said. Not yet, Grant replied. Arthur turned to him. Meaning? Grant's expression remained mild. Meaning, I have already requested a safety inspection. The county cannot allow an elderly man to endanger himself in an unstable property. There it was again. Protection, dressed as a leash. Caleb seized on it. Exactly. This is not about money. This is about your judgment. Arthur looked at the Huxley logo on Grant's truck. Then why did your buyer send survey men up here before I signed anything? Elaine turned to Caleb. Survey men? Caleb opened his mouth, but Grant answered first. Preliminary visual review. Standard practice when a property is under discussion. Under discussion, Arthur repeated. Not sold. Grant's eyes cooled. Mr. Bell, at your age, it is understandable that legal processes feel threatening. Miriam stepped forward. Try that sentence on me instead. Grant ignored her. His gaze traveled down the hallway toward Studio B. Arthur saw it happen. Not curiosity, recognition. Grant looked at the gray door at the end of the hall for less than a second, but Arthur had spent his life reading weak signals. The man knew exactly where to look. Then, Grant said the thing he should not have said. There is no reason to make this harder by hiding in the room your brother locked. The station went still. Elaine looked confused. Caleb looked irritated. Miriam's pen stopped moving. Arthur did not blink. I never told you my brother locked a room. Grant's mouth closed. Only for a moment. Then he smiled again. Small towns remember stories. No, Arthur said. Small towns remember rumors. You remembered a door. Rosa moved beside Noah, as if placing herself between him and whatever might come next. Grant's tone lost some warmth. Mr. Bell, I am trying to prevent this from becoming ugly. It became ugly 30 years ago, Arthur said. You're just upset the building started speaking. Caleb stepped forward. Enough. You sound paranoid. Arthur turned on him then, not loudly, not cruelly, but with a force that made Caleb stop. You brought a developer to a station you said was worthless. You accepted his assessment. You talked about my future without me. You tried to trade my freedom for a sale packet. And now you call me paranoid because I noticed. Caleb's face flushed. Elaine whispered, Caleb? He did not answer her. Grant reached into his coat and pulled out a folded notice. The inspection request is filed. If this building fails, which it will, no one stays here. Not Mr. Bell, not the boy, not anyone. Noah looked down. Arthur saw it, the old fear returning to the young man's face. A door closing. A place lost before it had become home. That, more than the threat itself, settled something in Arthur. He stepped back into the doorway, not to retreat, but to make the station visible behind him. The patched window, the work lamp, the console, the people who had come because they still knew how to help. You can inspect it, Arthur said. You can measure every crack. You can photograph every rusted beam, but you cannot call it abandoned while we are restoring it. Grant's eyes narrowed. Miriam lifted the legal pad. And before anyone removes documents from this building, I suggest they remember that tampering with potential trust records will sound very different in front of a judge. Caleb looked at her. Trust records? Elaine looked at Arthur. Dad, what is she talking about? Arthur held her gaze. For the first time since this began, he saw uncertainty in his daughter's face, not fear of his age, but fear that she had trusted the wrong person. Grant saw it too. His voice turned brisk. Mrs. Bell, I recommend you leave before this becomes a legal conflict. Rosa laughed once. That means it already is one. A gust of wind moved through the tower outside, rattling the loose metal high above them. Everyone heard it. To Elaine, it may have sounded like a failing structure. To Grant, maybe a deadline. To Arthur, it sounded like the hill drawing breath. Grant stepped down from the porch. Caleb followed, but slower than before. Elaine remained one moment longer, looking at her father as if she had arrived to rescue him, and found instead that he was standing somewhere she did not understand. "Dad," she said softly, "what happened here?" Arthur looked past her toward Studio B. "The truth waited," he said. "Longer than it should have." Elaine's eyes filled, but Arthur did not open the door to forgiveness yet. Below the steps, Grant turned back. "The inspector comes tomorrow," he said. Arthur nodded. "Then tomorrow, we'll see what still works." Grant drove away first. Caleb followed. Elaine's car lingered at the gate before finally disappearing down the hill. Inside the station, Noah let out the breath he had been holding. Rosa locked the front door. Miriam looked at Arthur. "He knows about Studio B." Arthur placed one hand on the console. "Yes," he said, "and now we know he knows." Outside, the tower stood dark against the evening. But inside Miller Hill Station, nobody mistook the silence for surrender anymore. The inspector arrived at Miller Hill at 10 the next morning with a clipboard, a hard hat, and the expression of a man who had already been told what he was supposed to find. Sheriff Dale Mercer came with him. Grant Huxley stood beside his silver truck, speaking quietly to Caleb. Elaine remained near her car, arms folded against the wind. Rosa was on the porch. Miriam sat inside with the logbook under one hand. Noah waited by the generator room door, trying to look braver than he felt. Arthur opened the station himself. The inspector, Paul Drayton, began with the roof, the porch, the tower base, the broken windows, the exposed wiring, and the generator shed. Grant followed 3 steps behind, offering helpful comments in a voice smooth enough to oil a lock. Structural concern there. Potential public hazard. Uninhabitable, clearly. Arthur did not argue. He answered questions. He showed temporary repairs. He identified shutoff points, load paths, and emergency circuits. When Paul asked how long he had worked in communications, Arthur said, "Long enough to know a dead system from a sleeping one." Caleb rolled his eyes. Sheriff Mercer noticed. Dale had once been a young deputy during Miller Hill's final years. He had sat in this control room through a flood warning, eating vending machine crackers while Arthur kept road crews connected. Now he looked at Arthur with concern and respect. "Mr. Bell," he said, "can this place actually function?" Grant answered first. "With respect, Sheriff, that is not the legal question today." Miriam looked up. "It may become exactly the legal question." The wind rose before noon. Clouds pushed over the ridge, low and fast. Grant's truck radio chirped, then cut out. Elaine's phone lost signal. The inspector's tablet froze on a loading screen. Arthur looked toward the tower. He knew that sky. Not from an app. From years of watching pressure change in clouds, birds, and treetops. This was a hard spring storm moving too quickly through the valley. Thunder rolled while Paul inspected the tower fence. Grant checked his watch. "I think we have enough to issue a closure recommendation." "No," Arthur said. Everyone turned. "You asked whether this station can serve during emergency failure. Let the storm answer." Caleb stepped forward. "Grandpa, stop. You're embarrassing yourself." Elaine said, "Caleb." It was the first time she had said his name like a warning. Then the town below went dark. From the hilltop, they saw it happen in pieces. The traffic light at Main and Carter blinked out. The grocery sign died. The courthouse clock vanished, and one street after another lost power beneath the rolling gray sky. Sheriff Mercer reached for his radio. Static answered him. Arthur turned to Noah. "Fuel line? Ready. Battery bridge? Set. Rosa? Heater off. Non-essential lines clear. Miriam, keep the log and Jacob's letter with you." Miriam closed the folder. "Already done." Arthur entered the control room. For a moment, age caught him in the doorway. His heart hammered. His legs felt wooden. Noah reached toward him, but Arthur lifted one hand. "I'm all right." And this time, no one used those words against him. They went to work. Noah primed the generator. Rosa held the lamp. Arthur checked the auxiliary feed, tightened the ground clamp, and set the old emergency band to the county frequency. Rain struck the roof. Wind pushed through every weak seam in the building. "Now," Arthur said. Noah pulled. The generator coughed, failed, caught again, and roared into rough life. The control board flickered. One gauge trembled upward. A red bulb above the console blinked once. Then again. Arthur placed his hand over the microphone. Grant came into the doorway. "You are not authorized to broadcast." Sheriff Mercer stepped in front of him. "If my radio is down and this one works, I'll hear him out." Arthur switched on the monitor. The station answered with a low hum, broken but alive. He did not broadcast first. He played Jacob's recording. Jacob's damaged voice filled the control room, then the porch speaker, then the old emergency band. The original deed names the hill as emergency use land held in trust, Bell family custodianship, not private ownership. Commissioner Huxley changed the index. If they prove abandonment, they can take it. If you prove function, they cannot. Grant lunged toward the console. Rosa blocked him with the crowbar in her hand. "Try me." Sheriff Mercer caught Grant by the arm. "Don't." Outside, through the storm, a truck horn sounded from the road below. Then another. People were hearing it: a deputy with an old receiver, a farmer with a scanner, someone in a dark kitchen turning a dial because memory had moved faster than the internet. Arthur took the microphone. "This is Arthur Bell at Miller Hill Station," he said. His voice cracked on the first word, then steadied. "To anyone receiving, Whitaker County has a power failure moving across the south grid. Stay off Ridge Road near Canaan Bridge until the sheriff confirms conditions. If you have medical equipment dependent on power, contact neighbors with generators. Sheriff Mercer is on site and will relay as able." Dale stared at him. Then Arthur patched the sheriff through the auxiliary line. "This is Sheriff Mercer," Dale said. "Confirming emergency relay through Miller Hill. All units, respond if receiving." Static. Then a voice. "Unit 3 receiving Miller Hill." Another followed. "County Fire receiving." Then a woman's voice, faint and shaking. "This is Maple Lane. My husband's oxygen machine is down." Arthur closed his eyes for half a breath. The station was not dead. It was working. Noah looked at the red bulb as if he were watching a miracle made of wires. Miriam opened Jacob's letter. "Arthur." The deed packet. South panel. Behind the acoustic board. During a break between relays, Noah and Rosa helped him into Studio B. Grant protested from the hall, but Sheriff Mercer kept him back. Arthur crossed to the south wall, found the newer acoustic square, and pried it loose with Rosa's knife. Behind it was a metal box wrapped in oilcloth. Miriam opened it at the desk. Inside lay the original deed, the trust document, duplicate index sheets, and a photograph of Jacob standing beside the Studio B console, one hand raised in half a wave. Elaine began to cry, not loudly, just one hand over her mouth as the story she had believed collapsed in front of her. Caleb stared at the documents. His face had gone gray. Grant said, "Those papers are decades old. Their validity is—" "Enough," Sheriff Mercer said. The word landed harder than a shout. Miriam held up the deed. "The seal is original. The trust language is intact. And this station, as of this moment, is serving emergency communication." Thunder shook the building, but no one moved to leave. Arthur returned to the microphone, not because he wanted victory, but because the town still needed instructions. For the next hour, Miller Hill Station did what it had been built to do. It connected stranded roads, dark houses, deputies, fire crews, and frightened people who thought no one could hear them. And when the storm finally began to pass, Grant Huxley stood silent beneath the old tower, listening to a truth his family had spent 30 years trying to bury travel farther than any signature he had come to steal. For 3 days after the storm, Whitaker County talked about Miller Hill as if the tower had risen from the grave. People who had not said Arthur Bell's name in years now repeated it in grocery lines, church parking lots, and front porches still smelling of wet leaves. The video of the old generator spread across town, but the thing people remembered most was Arthur's voice on the emergency band, rough with age, steady with purpose, telling frightened neighbors which roads to avoid and where help was moving. Grant Huxley did not come back to the station. Sheriff Mercer did. So did 2 county officials, 1 archive clerk, and a state investigator who carried the original trust documents away in a sealed folder after Miriam made certified copies and watched every signature placed on the chain of custody form. The investigation would take months. Men like Grant rarely built their lives on only one buried paper. But Miller Hill was no longer an easy hill to steal. It had witnesses now. Caleb came on the 4th afternoon. He arrived alone, without his polished portfolio, without Grant, without the blue-tabbed sale packet. He parked at the gate and walked up the hill in a gray sweatshirt Arthur recognized from high school, the one Lena had patched at the elbow. For once, Caleb looked less like a young man performing control and more like a boy who had found the door locked after doing wrong. Arthur sat on the porch with a mug of coffee while Noah repaired the loose handrail. Caleb stopped at the bottom step. "Grandpa." Arthur did not answer right away. The old habit in him wanted to make it easier. To rescue Caleb from shame the way he had once rescued him from scraped knees and summer fears. But age had taught Arthur that forgiveness given too quickly could become another kind of silence. "What do you need?" Arthur asked. Caleb swallowed. "I came to say I'm sorry." Noah kept working, but slower. Arthur looked at his grandson. "For what?" Caleb's face tightened. "For not listening." "That is a beginning," Arthur said, not an answer. Caleb looked toward the tower. "I thought I was being practical. I thought you were holding on to something that was gone." Grant made it sound simple. "And I wanted it to be simple." "You wanted it to be profitable," Arthur said. Caleb looked down. Yes, the honesty did not fix anything, but it was the first useful sound Caleb had made in a long time. "If you want back into my life," Arthur said, "you do not begin by deciding what I need. You begin by asking. You do not touch my papers. You do not speak to developers about my property, my health, or my future. And you do not call concern love when it is really convenience." Caleb nodded once, tears bright but not falling. "I understand." "No," Arthur said gently. "You are beginning to." Elaine came 2 days later. She brought no casserole, no brochure, no folder. Only herself, a box of Lena's old scarves, and a silence that did not try to defend itself before Arthur was ready. They sat in the control room while rain tapped softly against the repaired window. Elaine touched the edge of the console where she had once pretended to report from the clouds. "I was afraid of losing you," she said. Arthur looked at her hands. They were Lena's hands in shape, though not in steadiness. "So you tried to make me smaller," he said. Elaine closed her eyes. Yes, that was the sentence Arthur had needed. Not a speech, not a defense, a clear line of truth. "I don't know how to forgive that yet," he said. She nodded, crying quietly. "Then I'll learn how to wait." Waiting was not forgiveness, but it was different from control. That was enough for one day. By the end of summer, Miller Hill Station had changed again, not into what it had been. Arthur did not want that. The past had already done its work, both beautiful and terrible. He wanted the station to become what Lena had somehow imagined before anyone else could see it. Miriam helped establish the trust publicly under its true language. Rosa organized volunteers before Arthur asked, and then pretended she had not organized anything at all. Sheriff Mercer arranged emergency coordination tests twice a month. Noah stayed. At first, Noah said it was temporary. Then he fixed the generator properly. Then he learned the board. Then he started studying communications repair at the community college 30 miles away. Arthur taught him how to hear the difference between dead air and a weak signal. Noah taught Arthur how to make a digital archive without accidentally deleting civilization. They called the place the Listening House. Not everyone understood the name at first. They expected a museum or a restored emergency station. It became both, but also something gentler. On Tuesday evenings, older residents came to record stories their families had stopped asking about. A retired nurse spoke about delivering babies in a blackout. A widower brought love letters tied with blue thread. A former lineman cried while describing the storm that had nearly killed him and the radio voice that guided rescuers to his truck. Arthur did not speak much during those sessions. He listened. Sometimes Caleb came and repaired steps, painted trim, or carried boxes without being asked to stay for supper. Sometimes Elaine came and sat beside the second desk, labeling recordings the way Lena once had. Arthur did not pretend the old wound had vanished, but he allowed time to do honest work, and he allowed actions to weigh more than apologies. One evening in October, exactly 30 years after the date on Jacob's final entry, Arthur opened the broadcast log to the last page. Below Jacob's warning, beneath the frequency, Lena had written one sentence in her careful hand. Arthur had missed it all these years because the cloth fold had covered the bottom edge. When they stop listening, build a place where they have to begin again. Arthur read it aloud once. Noah stood beside him. Elaine covered her mouth. Caleb stepped back as if the words had found him personally. Rosa wiped her eyes and blamed dust. Miriam said nothing, which meant she felt everything. That night, the tower light came on. Not the old emergency red, but a warmer beacon installed beneath it, soft enough not to blind pilots, bright enough to be seen from the valley. People gathered outside with coffee cups and folding chairs. The station door stayed open. Arthur sat in the control room, headphones resting lightly over his silver hair, while an elderly woman named Mrs. Alvarez leaned toward the microphone for the first recording of the evening. "My children think this story is too old to matter," she said. Arthur smiled and touched the switch. "Then let's make sure it has somewhere to live," he replied. Outside, Miller Hill shone over the town that had once forgotten it, and inside the room where silence had nearly won, another voice began.